Hi everybody, it's Julia from Matheson Travel coming to you this week from San Francisco again. And this week is a little bit all about river cruising, and so I wanted to talk to you about that. I know some of you have been reading my blog, but if you haven't and you just want to know, is river cruising right for you? This little video tip will give you a little bit of an idea of what river cruising is like. First of all, the pros. Obviously, just like any cruise, you only unpack once and you don't have to move your belongings around, and you have one room that you can sort of inhabit for your week or 2-week vacation, which can be really, really nice. Believe me, as somebody that moved around every other day, staying in one spot kind of can be very, very nice when you're on vacation. It's also a really good way to kind of see quite a bit of terrain, especially in Europe, quickly. I mean, on the cruise I went on, it was 2 weeks and we saw like 5 countries, but it was a very relaxed way to see a bunch of different places. You also really get in the interior of the country, whereas some of these cruises in Europe are, you know, obviously on the big boats, they're on the exterior of the country. And so this really gets you into the heart of the country, and the riverways really have been the you know, lifeblood of Europe specifically, but pretty much everywhere. I mean, rivers have been used for commerce and everything like that, so a lot of the cities have a lot of interest, historical and economical interest, so you get to see a lot of that good stuff. It's also a much prettier way of traveling, or in a much more comfortable way of traveling than, say, a motor coach tour. If you do a motor coach tour of, again, say, Europe, you're going to spend a couple hours driving here and there every day, usually. And that's nice, and, you know, some of the roads, the countryside roads are beautiful and everything like that, but there really is nothing that can compare with sitting top deck with these beautiful castles floating by, and beautiful towns and scenery. And so that's it's a really lovely way of traveling. And a lot of times they do travel overnight so that you spend most of your day exploring whatever destination you're in. So that's another good thing. You also have lots of options, and this is actually one of the differences in some of the river cruises as far as what you're doing on each day. Some river cruises, you pretty much, the whole group goes and does one thing, and then that's really it. Some river cruises give you a lot more choices where you could bike for the day, or go on a walking tour, or go on a bus tour, depending on where you are, and again, which line. Now, some of the cons with river cruises. As someone who is not their typical demographic, I will let you know that there was, on my ship of 120 people this summer, there was one honeymoon couple that was younger than me, and then everybody was probably in their 50s or much older. So it can be a bit of an older crew, you know, so just be aware of that. I would not think that river cruises, at least in Europe, would be a great thing to take young kids on unless they were super into history, because one of the biggest drawbacks to the river cruise that I found was that, especially like at night when we were sailing, there's really not a lot to do. You know, you pretty much sit around and have cocktails and chat. We did have a couple game nights, a couple nights if we were leaving later in the evening, they were able to bring on local dancers or performers, or if we were staying overnight, like in Amsterdam, we had a beautiful concert by a trio of violinists, and that was wonderful. But over 2 weeks, we probably had, I want to say, 6 or 7 nights or something where there was some sort of entertainment, or we went out to dinner or something like that, and the rest of the time was really just dinner on the boat and then drinks in the lounge after, or up deck. So that can be, especially for younger kids, that can be a little boring. The food is great. Speaking of dinners, the food is really great, and a lot of the river cruises really emphasize how local and how great their food is. But as somebody said on our boat, it is kind of like you're going back to the country club. I mean, it can get a little repetitive. It's very elegant meals, but you know, it can get a little repetitive. Even if they have different things every night, it's all sort of the same, especially for 2 weeks. So those are, oh, and then the final thing that I think is an interesting comparison to a bus tour that not a lot of people think about is you're on a boat of anywhere from 100 to 200 guests. And again, that's another big differentiator between the lines, is how many guests are on each boat. But that's a pretty big group. And even though they divide you up every morning, so they're only in mini groups of 30 or I don't know, 45 on some of the bigger boats, you know, you're still in a pretty big group. And if group tours, when you're on a bus of 30 or 40 people, if that bothers you, that might be something to be aware of with river cruising. Like I said, some of them have a lot of different choices, and there were definitely days that I was completely by myself, or with 2 or 3 other people or something like that. There is flexibility, but for the major sites, the major excursions, you are going to be sort of in this massive group invading a town and moving en masse. So if that's something that bothers you, that's something to be aware of with river cruising. But I will say that there is a reason they are so popular. They are wonderful, and you got to book about a year in advance. So if you're thinking about next summer, go ahead and book. So that's it for this week, and I'll talk to you next week.